In this video, you will discover why having a broad podcast keeps you stuck with slow and steady podcast growth, how pivoting to a focused show is the fastest way to start gaining traction in 2025, and finally, the proven framework for narrowing your show, positioning it so it ranks higher on Apple Podcasts and gets discovered by more of the right listeners. This video really is for podcasters who have launched their podcast more than 12 months ago. The likelihood is you've been podcasting for 1, 2, maybe 3 years, maybe even 5 years, who knows, right? You've been consistent and you're probably proud that you've stuck at it for so long. You know your content is good, but for whatever reason, your podcast isn't growing as fast as you like. Your audience and your growth feels kind of stuck, and your show isn't being discovered consistently by new listeners. And finally, again, your podcast probably isn't bringing you leads or sales through the show. So what I wanted to cover is a situation that came up for one of our clients in a similar spot. This happened in a recent group coaching call that we had, and it was essentially led to a breakthrough that I want to give you here. The problem for most podcasters isn't the lack of the potential of your show. The problem is for most podcasters, they're trying to grow their podcast as if it's the final brand. And I know that sounds a bit odd. It sounds kind of airy-fairy. I'll break down exactly what I mean by that in just a moment. And why this is an issue is because if you're trying to grow your show, it's not about starting your show off as if it's the final brand, the final version of what you want your podcast to be. It starts by, again, creating the first bridge, meaning what's the first step to building this final brand you're trying to create. Again, I'm going to break down exactly what I mean right now. So for one of our clients, Eleni, she had a massive vision for a show, but this was in conflict with what her audience needed from her. She shared in a recent coaching call, and we have a group coaching call every Monday with entrepreneurs and experts who are looking to grow their podcast in our program, the Get More Listeners Academy. She wanted a program to reflect her long-term vision. She wants a brand that's all about holistic wellness, connected to a documentary and project she's been working on for years. And her documentary and her focus, all about holistic wellness, was focused around various different types of chronic illnesses. But the issue that she felt with this old way was she was trying to essentially build this brand from day one, meaning she wanted to build this giant holistic wellness brand that connected to reversing chronic illness, again, chronic illness amongst a bunch of different things from day one with her podcast. And this idea of almost having this vision you have for your show and starting with that vision, this is a trap that so many podcasters fall into, because you start the podcast thinking this podcast should reflect my whole body of work. I want to speak to every type of client that you help. It needs to sound polished, professional, and again, have that big brand ready vibe. So what do? Well, you create a podcast that has a super broad message. You have a bunch of deep theory, probably beautiful branding, but a vague and hard to describe show that's not being discovered by new listeners every single week because it's broad, it's generic, it's really not that clear or specific. And here's a hard truth. That final version of a show is what a brand will become, or what your brand will become in 1, 2, 3, maybe 5 years, maybe even 10 years, but it's not necessarily the starting point. That perfect brand is for someone who already has a massive audience and lots of attention, not for someone who's trying to earn it. And I would say that for a lot of our clients that we work with, they've got this brand vision that they're trying to build, but they're trying to build their audience and they're trying to earn that brand that it's trying to build, but it don't start with the final product. So why does this happen? Well, this happens because you're essentially way too close to your own genius. You're trying to fit in all of who you are into your podcast, but right at this very moment, your audience don't even know you exist. And quite frankly, they don't really care about you and your grand vision just yet. The second thing, and the second reason why this happens is because, again, like I mentioned, you're building the end game brand first. You're designing your show to reflect what you want it to be in 5 years, not what your listeners need right now today. So for our client, like, she wanted to have this wellness brand, but the issue is people didn't know about her wellness brand. And if she started with this broad generic thing about a wellness brand, how is she going to attract people in? She needs to be way more specific, starting with a particular chronic illness, i.e. hypertension, positioning the show to target people with hypertension as a problem, and then attracting them because they're interested in hypertension. Once they're in, she can do all of the selling about chronic illness, generally speaking, but she needs to position the show to attract them in the first place. If it's just very broad messaging, very generic, it's going to be hard to attract more of the right listeners because it's broad and generic. And I don't know about you, but there's a lot of broad generic marketing out there, and I'd rather consume content that feels hyper specific to me. And then the third and final piece is you're essentially trying to solve multiple problems at once. So instead of obsessing over one clear pain point your podcast solves for people, end up covering a bunch of stuff on mindset, strategy, energy, health, leadership, purpose, hoping that something will stick. Meaning, again, you're covering a wide range of topics, but it's not really clear or specific. And if someone discovers your show, they're kind of confused at what your show actually does and who it's for. The consequence of this is your episodes essentially don't rank on Apple and Spotify. Meaning, if you're covering mindset, strategy, energy, health, leadership, purpose, how will Apple and Spotify know what keywords to rank your show for? Either covering a bunch of different topics. They don't know what your show is for. But if you had a podcast that was just covering, let's say, hypertension, you can just cover content on hypertension and Apple and Spotify knows to rank your show for the keyword hypertension, which increases your visibility on these platforms. The second problem and consequence of this is your ideal listeners can't find themselves in your titles. If you have a title and a podcast where a bunch of your content talks about health, mindset, energy, health and fitness, leadership, purpose, realistically, not every single one of those topics will feel relevant to the audience you're trying to attract. So great, let's say they do discover your show, they then look through your back catalog and none of the titles feels like it's highly relevant to them and their problem. So they just don't stick around and listen. And again, this is a problem that so many podcasters face that I don't want you to go through, but you don't need to. You can grow a podcast in a much simpler and easier way by just avoiding some of these mistakes. The third thing is your podcast doesn't grow even though you're doing all the right things. You've got this final brand show that's covering a wide range of topics. And if you're thinking, what about Mel Robbins? What about Tony Robbins? What about all these other people? The thing is, these are massive celebrity figures who already had a big audience before starting their podcast. And even for a lot of them, they started off with having a niche show. Like Tim Ferriss, his whole thing was unconventional ways to be productive and superhuman health. Very niche podcast, very niche show. And he built a core fan base around one particular type of topic. And then over time, once he had a core fan, he then built out this empire we see today as a Tim Ferriss show. But again, it didn't start off like that. And then finally, you feel like you're pouring out so much value into a void. And this is what so many of our clients say. You're in podcasting, publishing really valuable content, having these amazing conversations, but for whatever reason, your numbers just don't seem to budge. And it's because you're starting with this final brand of what you think your show should be, rather than taking the steps I'm going to outline right now, which makes growing a podcast way easier. And this is really when you start questioning the whole thing, right? You're thinking, hey, is this podcast even worth it? And it's like, yeah, it is worth it. And you can do it. You can do it, right? But if you keep building, but not if you keep building for someday instead of today, meaning like you're building this podcast for this grand vision you have for 5 years today, rather than asking what's the first step to building this podcast up. Whereas a new perspective is this: your podcast isn't the empire. It's the doorway into your world. Now let's break down with a quick real life example of what this means. Imagine for a second you have a street performer trying to draw in a crowd. They're juggling knives, playing guitars, telling jokes, doing backflips, and painting all at the same time. Now, while this is impressive, most people just walk away feeling slightly confused, thinking, what the hell is this all about? Is this for me? Do I stop or do I keep walking? And most just keep walking. Now, compare this to another musician across the street. He holds up a single card in front of you. He looks you dead in the eyes and he says, pick a card and I'll show you exactly how your mind is lying to you. You stop, you're hooked. And then, of course, you stay to watch the full show because you're simply intrigued. You're like, what the hell's going on? Now, why does this happen? Why is that you have this one person who's performing in a crowd that people just walk by and they're a bit confused, and another person who keeps your entire attention? It's because of this. One person is trying to showcase everything that they can do, which actually repels the attention they're trying to attract. But when you are someone who leads with one clear promise, with a musician, one clear promise, pick a card and I'll tell you exactly how your mind is lying to you. Even though you're probably confused at what the hell he's talking about, you'll still play along. He still has your attention. You'll stop. You'll keep engaged and you'll stick around to see what else you can do and what else he's going to do. So going back to our client's big vision versus the audience she needed, again, like I mentioned on her call, she wanted to do this broad show about holistic health and wellness. That was a final project. But what's the first step for her to making that realization come true? So what was the breakthrough? The breakthrough was this. We needed to start small, and we needed to focus her podcast on one condition her ideal listeners were dealing with. So it could have been hypertension or autoimmune fatigue. Truthfully speaking, we're currently right now, as of recording this episode, figuring this piece out with her, but we want to kind of share this journey of how we're solving these problems as we go along, because right now she's in a spot where she's got to make a decision, right? So the breakthrough was, again, picking hypertension or autoimmune fatigue, whatever it might be, and then use that focus show to build momentum, trust, and visibility with that core audience. When she creates a podcast all about hypertension, she can actually build an audience that loves her show, where every single episode is made for them. That's how she's able to attract the core audience. And then over time, later on, she can broaden her audience, broaden her reach. But if she doesn't, and she tries to just have this overall broad wellness podcast to begin with, no one person is going to stick around long term, because every single episode is different. Her show isn't for a particular person. It's not solving a painful enough problem. Whereas the new way, again, is creating the bridge. Again, your show isn't the empire, it's the bridge. It doesn't need to be perfect straight away today. It doesn't need to be this grandiose thing. It just needs to connect the listener's pain to your solution, the solution being your podcast, how you can help them solve that pain point. So there's a simple process that you can start following today if you find that your show is currently too broad. If you're stuck with slow growth and you realize, like, I should probably be more specific, I should probably niche down. I have this grand vision, but my first step is probably building a core audience and fan base. This is a process you can use starting today. The first one is to obsess over one painful problem, and it needs to be a tangible problem. So pick one specific struggle your ideal client wakes up worrying about. For example, how do I stop overthinking in high-stake meetings? This could be targeting people in corporate trying to get to promotion. And for them, they keep worrying about the fact that they're overthinking, they mumble their words, they're not great communicators in high-stake environments. That's a painful problem. You could have a podcast all about that. And that's what number 2 really is all about. Step 2 is make that the center of the podcast. So everything from your show name, your tagline, your topics, should clearly solve that problem. It should communicate, hey, this is the podcast for you. Your show becomes the podcast that helps leaders communicate with confidence, even in high stakes meetings. You have a communication podcast for leaders who are anxious and worried during meetings. Like, it literally could just be as simple as that. And you will find so many people who flock because they have this problem. They see your show is specifically made for them, and every single episode keeps them hooked. Step number 3 is to validate through results and feedback. So once you've made these changes to your actual podcast, track your listener growth, look at your retention time, look at the conversation and feedback you're getting from your audience. Now, what you want to do is, after you've probably published for like 3 months, just look at all of your titles and the topics you've covered on the show, and double down on the episodes that are proven to work and are proven to gain traction. And of course, eliminate the ones that don't. It's really going to be that simple in terms of being an iterative process. And then step number 4, expand with intention. So after you've built up this core fan base, same with our client, once you've built up their trust and their traction, then you can slowly broaden your horizon of who you want to target with the show. That's totally fine. But again, that's not the starting point. That's the end game, to slowly broaden your audience. Slowly. Okay, my audience like podcasts about veganism. Awesome. What other things could my audience like as well? If they're into veganism, they might be into just, general health, they might be into, getting better sleep. This is a random example. But you slowly broaden your audience to a point where you then have a general wellness podcast. But don't start with that. You start with a vegan podcast and build your way out. I think a better example might be if you start with a podcast specifically about business, or about like a specific type of business, about sales, then you went to marketing, then you went to operations, then you went to overall business, then you went to business mindset. Like, you can expand what your podcast is about, but you have to, again, start with a focused core fan base. So you built the like, know, and trust, and are willing to work and stick around through your expansion. So again, step number 1, obsess over one painful pain. Step number 2, make that the center of your podcast. Step 3, validate through results and feedback. And step 4, expand with intention. And the outcome of this is simple, right? You have a much sharper positioning of your podcast, more listeners stick around, easier SEO and discoverability because you have the right keywords to rank for and they're specific, higher lead quality because they, again, just kind of self-select. They kind of qualify themselves because it's clear who the podcast is for. Better alignment between your podcast and your business, which all leads to you finally feeling clear and confident about the show and who it's for. You end the guessing game of, do I need to rebrand again? And finally, you feel relieved the pressure of having to be perfect. And then again, instead you can focus on what's a one simple step I can start taking today in order to grow my podcast. And for a lot of you, that will start by niching down your show. Look, if you find this valuable, be sure to leave a like and a comment down below. I'm going to go through the questions, answer them as much as I can. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to go through your back catalog and binge the entirety of our YouTube videos. With that being said, I'll catch you in the next video.